His commander warned, "Break formation once, kid, and you won't make it home alive." He broke anyway. Veteran pilot said, "A rookie can't outrun a Messerschmitt on his first mission." He outran one. They told him, "Dive like that again and you'll rip the Mustang in half." He dove anyway. Briefings warned, "No rookie survives a German ace on his tail, not ever." He survived. Instructors said, "If you improvise up there, you're already dead, understand?" He improvised. Every pilot brief warned, "Dive like that and the Messerschmitt will tear you apart." He dove harder. At 24,000 feet over central Germany, Danny Keller slams his Mustang into a steep climbing roll, the horizon dropping out of his canopy. A Bf-109 clings to his tail, guns already flashing. Every instructor's voice in his head says, "Don't do this." His hands do it anyway. In the next 15 seconds, he either dies or invents something new. To understand what happens next, you have to understand why so many American pilots were dying in 1943 and early 44. The 8th Air Force had long-range bombers, brave crews, and supposedly solid tactics. But German fighters were ripping through formations with head-on attacks and vertical dives the manuals barely mentioned. The sky didn't behave like the diagrams on classroom blackboards. Danny Keller grew up in Kansas wheat country, watching crop dusters carve insane loops over his family's fields. His father drove a tractor. His mother counted every penny. Danny built model planes on the kitchen table and copied the shapes those real pilots flew, diving to gain speed, arcing up in big climbing turns. Long before he saw a manual, his eyes were learning energy fighting. When he finally made it into pilot training, the conflict started immediately. Instructors wanted tight, neat formations, smooth, gentle turns, and predictable patterns. Danny's instincts pulled him a little higher, a little steeper, a little more vertical than the textbook said. On the ground, he got chewed out for sloppy flying. In the air, other students quietly asked, "How did you end up behind me again?" By the time he earned his wings, Keller wasn't a star student. His file said it clearly: rough around the edges, exceptional awareness, needs discipline. He had about 230 hours in his logbook, just enough to be dangerous to himself and others. But the war in Europe didn't care about perfect pilots. It needed bodies in cockpits now. Orders sent him to England to a P-51 unit that had already buried friends. His first night at the 364th Fighter Group, Danny sat under a map covered in colored strings. Red for bomber routes, blue for fighter cover, black pins for lost crews. The operations officer didn't sugarcoat anything. Stay in formation. Guard the bombers. Don't play hero. In the corner, a tired captain pointed at a cluster of photos framed in black. "Those guys followed the book," he muttered. "Didn't help them." On March 9, 1944, Keller's name appears on the board for the first time. Escort duty, B-17s headed for ball-bearing plants near Erfurt. Takeoff before dawn, rendezvous over the channel, expected moderate to heavy resistance code for serious trouble. Keller is Blue 4, tail end Charlie of his flight. Job description: stay glued to his leader, watch their backs, do nothing creative. In the gray morning light, Danny walks out to a brand new P-51. The crew chief has painted her name on the nose in yellow, Cornfield Comet. The cockpit smells like fresh paint and cold metal. As he straps in, his hands tremble just enough that he notices. He closes the canopy, hears the Merlin roar to life, and realizes there's no pause button now. This is no longer training. The four-ship flight climbs through low cloud and levels out over a flat sheet of steel-colored water. The channel passes beneath them, then the distant dark smudge of occupied Europe rises ahead. Radio chatter, fuel checks, formation calls, it all sounds normal. But inside Keller's helmet, the world has narrowed to engine gauges, his leader's wingtip, and the constant question: will I remember anything they taught me if someone tries to kill me? As they cross into German airspace, the sky becomes crowded. Contrails from other fighter groups, bomber formations stretching from horizon to horizon, and the first distant blossoms of black flak. Keller watches one B-17 take a near miss and wobble back into position. Somewhere above that maze of aluminum, unseen dots are already lining up their attacks. The map at briefing was flat. This is layered, moving, lethal. The first warning doesn't come from the escort fighters. It comes from a bomber radio. Bandits. 11 o'clock high. Keller cranes his neck and finally spots them, tiny specks against white contrails, then growing shapes. BF-109s and FW-190s, diving in a coordinated wave. They slice through one bomber squadron, tear open a flying fortress's wing, and roll away before the escorts can react. The neat diagrams are gone. Chaos has arrived. Two Messerschmitts slip in from behind a cloud, lining up on Keller's flight. Tracers whip past Blue 3's canopy. Blue lead snaps into a hard left brake, Blue 2 follows, but Blue 3 panics and rolls the wrong way. In that split second, Keller has to choose: follow his leader and cut across the Germans' guns, or break away and become the slowest, lowest target in a sky full of enemies. His hands move before the manual can argue. Keller rolls right, away from his leader, trying to preserve speed and avoid crossing through tracer fire. Instantly, one of the 109s latches onto him, adjusting his turn, closing the angle. The textbook says, flatten the turn, try to rate around faster, stay horizontal. The problem is simple and brutal. This German has seen that play 100 times. He knows how it ends. Every instructor's voice in Danny's head is yelling, tighten the turn, stay in plane. But something older kicks in the way. Crop dusters climbed out of their runs above Kansas fields. Instead of tightening the flat circle, he hauls the nose up and lets the Mustang spiral into a steep climbing roll. To the German, it looks like panic. To physics, it's something else, trading speed for altitude in a controlled corkscrew. As they climb, Keller's P-51 bleeds speed, but not as fast as the 109 turning inside him. The German has to pull harder GS to stay in position. At the top of the second spiral, Keller feels the Mustang still responding, still flying clean. The Messerschmitt doesn't. Its wings buffet, nose bobbing as it skates on the edge of a stall. For the briefest moment, the hunter has too little energy to keep biting. Keller rolls the Mustang over the top, sliding just outside the German's turn, and lets gravity help. The Bf-109 that was moments from firing into his cockpit now hangs in front of him, nose low, struggling. The gun sight ring settles over black crosses and metal. Danny squeezes the trigger. 6.50 calories hammer. The 109's engine erupts flame, canopy pops, and the fighter corkscrews down through cloud. Silence floods his headset. Adrenaline still shaking his arms, Keller hauls the Mustang back up toward the bomber stream. Blue flight is scattered but alive. Radio discipline pulls them back together. Short, clipped calls, no one mentioning how close it just was. They finish the escort portion of the mission in a blur of minor skirmishes and distant dogfights. When they finally turn for home over the North Sea, Keller realizes he can't clearly remember the last hour. Back at base, Cornfield Comet rolls to a stop, oil streaked and fuel low. The crew chief pulls the gun camera film and the debrief begins. When the intelligence officer reaches Keller, he doesn't just ask for headings and altitudes. He asks, explain how you got behind that 109. Keller tries to put the spiraling climb into words, but halfway through, the squadron operations officer cuts in. You climbed into him? In a side room, Keller stands in front of a blackboard. At first, he draws the fight the way he was taught. 2 circles, one inside the other, a losing flat turn. Then he shakes his head and erases it. It wasn't flat, sir. He draws spirals instead, one slightly wider, climbing, one tighter and slower inside. At the top, he marks a point. Here. He ran out of speed. I still had some. I just fell in behind him. The older pilots stare at the drawing. Everything they learned at tactical school says this should not work. German fighters, they've been told, dive better, accelerate faster in negative G moves. But the film from Keller's guns doesn't lie. A Bf-109 was behind him. Then it wasn't. One major shakes his head. Either this kid misread the situation, or we've been thinking too flat. Curiosity starts where certainty cracks. Within 48 hours, flight leaders are testing Keller's mistake in controlled training hops over the North Sea. 2 Mustangs simulate a tail chase. The lead plays the German, the wingman tries the spiraling climb. When it's flown right, rolling up and away instead of tightening, the inside aircraft bleeds speed first. Over and over, the outside pilot peaks higher, rolls over, and slides into a firing position. It's risky, but it's real. In the next tactics briefing, the group commander doesn't hide what they've found. He sketches Keller's spiral, labels the axis, and writes 2 words on the board: vertical lag. You're not chasing his tail in a flat circle anymore, he explains. You're lagging behind and above, then using extra energy to drop onto him when he's out. He underlines the next sentence. This is for when you're already losing. not for showing off. Some veterans resist. I've lived this long without barnstorming tricks. But combat doesn't care about pride. Slowly, element leaders teach the maneuver to wingmen they trust. If a 109 is eating you alive in the flat, they say, and you still have speed, get out of the plane of his turn. Go up. Make him pay to follow. Word spreads through the group not as official doctrine, but as whispered survival advice. On a later mission near Berlin, a different Mustang pilot finds himself in the same losing spiral against an FW-190. Old training says tighten and pray. Keller's story is in the back of his mind. He rolls into a vertical lag, feels his stomach drop as the sky corkscrews. The 190 tries to follow, runs out of energy first, and staggers. The Mustang slides behind and fires. One flaming wreck later, the skeptic has become a believer. Over the next months, kill ratios tell the real story. Units that adopt aggressive vertical energy tactics, high-speed dives, rolling climbs, Keller's maneuver, and others like it start reporting far fewer losses in close-in engagements. The Luftwaffe, once comfortable outturning textbook Americans in the horizontal, suddenly faces opponents who think in 3 dimensions. You can almost trace the change on a graph, the moment the fight leaves the chalkboard and enters the vertical. Keller doesn't become the top ace of the theater. He doesn't need to. He flies over 60 missions, escorts bombers into some of the most heavily defended skies in Europe, and survives being shot down by flak over Belgium. He spends 3 days moving at night, hiding by day before reaching friendly lines. When he returns to his unit, the younger pilots look at him differently, not just as another rookie, but as the guy whose crazy move everyone talks about. After the war, Danny stays in uniform as the Air Force transitions from propellers to jets. At training bases in the late 1940s and early 50s, instructors pull out new diagrams with new aircraft shapes, but the logic looks familiar. F-86 Sabre pilots learn about energy maneuvering, vertical overshoots, and lag rolls. The terminology is polished, mathematical, respectable. Few briefings mention that some of these ideas started with a scared 19-year-old on his first mission. In later life, Keller avoids the spotlight. When younger pilots or historians ask if he invented a combat tactic, he laughs it off. I didn't invent anything, he says. The airplane and gravity did. I was just too scared to stay flat. But the men whose gun camera film shows saved lives don't forget. At reunions, gray-haired veterans clap him on the shoulder and say things like, "You know that trick you pulled in 44? I used it in 45. My kids exist because of that." The deeper lesson doesn't live in a diagram. It lives in that moment when Keller ignored every printed rule and trusted what the sky was telling him. Doctrine matters. Training matters. But sometimes, the only way out of a losing situation is to step off the page, then have leaders brave enough to admit the manual might be wrong. A terrified 19-year-old didn't set out to change air combat. He just refused to die the proper way. If this story of a rookie who accidentally rewrote the rulebook hit you, don't let it vanish back into the archives. Hit like so more people see how real pilots actually survive these fights. Tap subscribe for more deep dive WW2 stories about tactics born in desperation, not classrooms. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and if anyone in your family ever flew, fought, or worked on these warbirds. You're helping keep their stories alive.